Welcome back to another explainer. Today we're diving into the fascinating and honestly completely misunderstood reality of pre-Islamic Arabia. We're going to break down the tense proxy wars, a massive global incense trade, and the incredibly complex spiritual atmosphere that was bubbling right before the birth of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu.
So let's dive right in and bust a massive myth off the bat. Was this region just an isolated Dark Age wasteland? Well, it's often called the Jahiliyyah, or Age of Ignorance. But when we actually look at the historical sources, totally different story. The Arabian Peninsula was this highly strategic, incredibly dynamic transit hub. It was literally caught right in the crossfire of global superpowers and booming international commerce. So no, not isolated at all. In a lot of ways, it was the beating heart of East-West trade.
To really wrap our heads around this era, here is our roadmap. We'll look at the clash of empires, the golden incense routes, Arabia's complex tribal web, Mecca as the neutral hub, and finally, the Kaaba before Islam.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the Clash of Empires, a global geopolitical chessboard.
Think of the 6th century kind of like an ancient Cold War. On one side, you've got the Christian Byzantine Empire. On the other, the Zoroastrian Sassanian Persian Empire. Now, because Arabia was so absolutely crucial for trade, both of these superpowers wanted control. But they didn't just invade directly. Instead, they used local Arab kingdoms as buffers, basically proxies to secure their borders. The Byzantines teamed up with Aksumite Ethiopia in the south and the Arab Ghassanid tribe up north. And the Sassanian Persians, they countered by backing the Arab Lakhmid tribe. The whole region was just this massive, high-stakes geopolitical chessboard.
Now, what is really wild here is how incredibly fast the southern region of Yemen violently changed hands. Early in the 6th century, a Himyarite king accepts Judaism and starts persecuting Christians. So the Christian Byzantines and Ethiopians respond with this massive military alliance in 524, and they completely conquer Yemen. Fast forward to 570, an Ethiopian viceroy named Abraha is in power, and he famously tries to march on Mecca with actual elephants to destroy the Kaaba and steal the trade routes. You might know it as the Year of the Elephant. Well, he fails, and right after that, the Sassanian Persians swoop in and take over Yemen by the end of the century. Talk about political whiplash, right?
Okay, moving right along to Section 2, the golden incense routes, the scent of wealth.
So, as we established, Arabia was definitely not just empty desert. It was a massive transit territory. You had this huge network of land and sea routes funneling insane luxury goods. Things like silk, precious stones, gold, and ivory from India and Africa, all the way up to the Mediterranean and Persia. The Arabian Peninsula was the essential land bridge, making all of this staggering wealth possible.
But you know what the real native treasures were? Aromatics. These unassuming, super rugged trees produced frankincense and myrrh. And because they grew almost exclusively in the harsh southern tip of Arabia, and because Roman and Persian temples demanded just massive quantities for their religious rituals and luxury lifestyles, these resins were literally as good as gold. They were an absolute game changer for the local economy.
But how do you move these highly prized goods hundreds of miles across an unforgiving desert? Well, Arabian tribes brilliantly mastered the domestication of the camel. They were the only animals capable of carrying heavy loads over those crazy distances without needing water constantly. And they didn't stop there. They built out this entire infrastructure network called caravanserais. We're talking roadside inns, forts, and wells, all strategically placed for safety and hydration. This network was the absolute backbone of the ancient global economy.
Let's zoom in a bit closer for Section 3, Arabia's complex tribal web, blood, sand, and survival. Let's see who is actually running these routes.
Out there, tribal loyalty was everything. The society was basically split between fierce nomadic Bedouins, who were absolutely vital because they provided armed escorts for the caravans, and settled townspeople. But there was a major problem. They were constantly plagued by deadly blood feuds. So to survive this warfare, and frankly protect their profits, they created some brilliant socio-religious systems. The Quraysh tribe in Mecca set up this powerful organization called the Hums system. By tying strict ritual, dietary, and clothing rules to a shared identity, they managed to guarantee safe passage for merchants across territories that were otherwise incredibly hostile.
And make no mistake, these tribes were becoming seriously powerful. Around 610 CE, at the Battle of Dukar, Arab Bedouin tribes completely crushed a formal Sassanian Persian army. This was huge. It was a massive turning point that proved the nomadic Arab tribes weren't just proxy pawns for fading empires anymore. They were a formidable, totally independent military force.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 4, Mecca, the neutral hub. So,
picture this. The empires up north have essentially choked off the borders with their relentless fighting and heavy taxation. Suddenly, there's this massive commercial vacuum. Mecca, tucked safely away in the central western Hijaz region, cleverly seizes the moment. The ruling Quraysh tribe starts negotiating these genius-neutral trade pacts with neighboring empires to ensure safe transit. They even set up a highly ordered civic council known as the Dar el-Nadwa. So scratch the idea of a lawless desert town. This was a sophisticated, highly organized society where elders met to solve problems, make international treaties, and manage global trade.
And finally, Section 5, the Kaaba before Islam, the sacred cube. Let's look at the real beating heart of Mecca's success.
Now, before Islam, Arabian religion was incredibly complex. The Kaaba itself was filled with around 360 different tribal idols. But, and this is a big but, beneath all that heavy polytheism, there was a lingering underlying thread of monotheism. Many Arabs actually retained a baseline belief in one supreme God, Allah. And they traced the very foundation of the Kaaba back to the prophet Abraham and his son Ishmael. It was this true spiritual melting pot that drew tribes from every single corner of the peninsula.
There's a quote from a pre-Islamic leader, Madad bin Amr al-Jurhumi, that hits the nail right on the head. He said, "Respect the house of God and do not ill-treat anyone who enters it and comes to honor its sanctity and to sell their goods or seek your protection." That perfectly captures how the Kaaba functioned as a strict haram, a sacred, violence-free zone. Inside Mecca, bloodshed, fighting, even cutting down trees, strictly forbidden. All those intense blood feuds we talked about, you had to literally check them at the door. You could come to honor the sanctuary safely and, just as importantly, to sell your goods without watching your back.
You can really see how this all builds together, right? Because absolutely no one was allowed to fight near the Kaaba during the sacred pilgrimage months, it became the ultimate safe haven. This guaranteed peace paved the way for massive, bustling seasonal markets, the most famous one being Ukaz. It was this incredible fusion. You had high-stakes tribal diplomacy, intense poetry competitions, deep spiritual rituals, and, of course, incredibly profitable trade happening all at once. Religion and commerce were totally intertwined, making Mecca the undisputed center of Arabian life.
So, what's the big takeaway from all this? Pre-Islamic Arabia was absolutely far from an isolated wasteland. By weaving together global trade routes, super sophisticated tribal treaties, and a strictly enforced sacred zone around the Kaaba, it became a highly connected, dynamic pressure cooker. I'll leave you with this thought. How did this perfect storm of global awareness, deep-seated tribal networks, and a central peaceful sanctuary perfectly set the stage for a monotheistic revelation that would literally change the course of human history? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the history you think you know.